The rain on Medriaas did not fall clean. It carried ash, and a faint metallic tang that clung to the tongue, as if the sky itself remembered fires. It drummed against the high windows of the keep and ran in slow rivulets over stone carved with faces that had never learned mercy. Tenebrae stood where the torchlight failed, bare feet on basalt cold enough to ache, and watched the hall as though it were a game board set out for his amusement. His robe, too heavy for a child, hung straight from narrow shoulders. The silver clasp at his throat caught the firelight and returned it without warmth. Lord Dramath paced near the dais, armor whispering with each turn. The war had roughened him, not merely in scar and muscle, but in the way his gaze swept each doorway as if expecting an assassin to step out of shadow. His jaw worked as he thought, as though he could grind his fears down to something manageable. "Your guests will come," Lady Asha said, voice soft beneath her veil. The bone beads in her hand clicked once, twice, in rhythm with the rain. "And when they do, they will weigh us. They will weigh him." Dramath's eyes flicked to Tenebrae. For a heartbeat, the Lord's expression softened, something like pride, something like awe. Then it hardened again into calculation. "They will kneel." Asha's fingers tightened. "Or they will cut." Tenebrae did not look at her. He did not need to. Her fear lay open to him like a book left too long near fire, pages curling. The fear tasted old. It tasted like a mother's dread, and like a priestess's certainty that the gods demanded payment. He let the fear sit in her chest. He did not soothe it. Comfort was a tool. It was not yet necessary. Across the hall, servants hurried with platters and pitchers, heads bowed, spines bent. They tried not to meet his eyes. Sometimes they failed. When they failed, they stiffened as though they had been struck. Their thoughts skittered into silence at his touch. Dramath stopped pacing. "Remember," he murmured, as if reminding himself. "The Republic thinks us dead. The Jedi think the Sith a cautionary tale. But tales can return." Tenebrae's mouth curved, not into a smile, but into the shape of one. Outside, thunder rolled like distant artillery. The keep, ancient and arrogant, waited to be judged. The landing yard stank of wet stone and old fuel. The shuttle's engines cooled with a hiss that sounded too much like a living thing dying slowly. Varen descended first, boots splashing through shallow puddles that reflected torchlight in broken gold. He moved like a man who had survived by never walking into a room without first measuring where the knives might be. The bronze amulet at his throat looked plain, almost humble, until the lightning flared and etched its surface in a lattice of tiny runes that seemed to crawl. Behind him came Nira, her velvet darkened by rain, her smile unbothered by weather or exile. She lifted her face to the ash-tainted sky as though it were a lover's hand. Kairos followed, broader than the others, his cloak hanging heavy. He carried himself with the burdened steadiness of someone who had once commanded and now merely endured. Dramath waited beneath the archway, torches flaring on either side of him. He did not step forward to greet them, making them come to him. It was an old game, played even at the end of empires. "My lords," Dramath said, voice carrying over the rain. "My lady." Varen's gaze traveled past Dramath's armor, past the torches to the darkness under the arch. There, a child stood half-hidden, bare feet on wet stone, robe unmoving despite the wind. Tenebrae met Varen's eyes. For an instant, the world narrowed to that exchange. Varen's expression did not change, but something in the set of his shoulders tightened. He felt it. The pressure against the mind, the subtle insistence. He did not allow his thoughts to scatter. The amulet at his throat warmed, and the pressure slid aside like a blade skidding off mail. Nira noticed the moment too. Her smile widened a fraction, delighted at a secret she could taste but not yet name. Kairos only frowned as if he had stepped into a cold room and could not find the draft. "This is the boy," Nira said lightly, as though commenting on a horse's breeding. "So small for such rumor." Dramath's hand settled on Tenebrae's shoulder. It might have been protective. It might have been possessive. "This is my son," he corrected. "And he is not rumor." Tenebrae's voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough that the rain tried to swallow it. "Welcome," he said. "You are late." Kairos blinked, startled not by rudeness but by the flat authority in a child's tone. Varen said nothing. He only watched Tenebrae as one watches a crack spreading through stone. The feast was a performance staged against hunger. Roasted meat steamed on platters. Dark wine glimmered in metal cups. Incense burned thick enough to sting the eyes, as though Dramath hoped smoke could hide desperation. The hall's walls were carved into faces that twisted in perpetual agony, mouths open in stone screams that never ended. Dramath lifted his cup. "To survival," he declared. "To vengeance," someone answered from farther down the table. "To the Empire," a third said, and the word tasted like grief. Varen drank without toasting. He ate sparingly. His gaze moved constantly, counting people, measuring loyalties. Exile had gathered them here, lords who once held worlds now clinging to scraps of authority like beggars clutching coins. Nira ate as though she had never gone hungry in her life. She laughed at stories of battles lost, turning tragedy into something glittering. Kairos chewed slowly, eyes distant, remembering comrades whose names no one here dared speak aloud. Tenebrae sat at Dramath's right hand, a child among predators, and yet the hall's attention bent toward him like grass toward a storm. He did not eat. He did not drink. He watched. When a servant's hands shook too badly pouring wine, Tenebrae's eyes flicked to the spill. The servant froze. The cup steadied. The wine flowed smooth as if guided by invisible fingers. Dramath noticed. Pride flashed across his face like firelight. "You see?" he said to the table at large, voice pitched to carry. "Even the weak obey him." Varen's amulet warmed again as Tenebrae's attention brushed him, testing, seeking. Varen kept his face blank. He allowed no fear to rise high enough for the boy to taste. "And what would you have us do with such obedience?" Varen asked at last, voice mild. Dramath leaned forward. "What we have always needed," he said. "Unity." A murmur ran the length of the table. Some looked relieved, as though the idea itself could mend the fracture of their defeat. Others looked wary, seeing only chains. Nira's eyes shone. "A throne," she purred. "A banner, a name the scattered can rally to." Kairos shifted. "A child cannot command war." Tenebrae spoke without turning his head. "A child can command you," he said, and the hall went very still. Servants stopped breathing. Several Sith Lords' hands twitched toward hidden weapons. Dramath's laughter boomed, too loud, too quick, as if to smother the unease. "He is bold," Dramath said, forcing mirth. "He speaks as an heir should." Varen watched Tenebrae's fingers, small, pale, resting on the table as if carved there. No tremor, no excitement, only certainty, like a blade already drawn. Somewhere in the smoke, a servant sobbed silently, tears streaking down a face kept carefully lowered. Tenebrae did not look away from the table. The hall's shadows deepened, listening. It began as a jest. One of Dramath's lesser captains, already half drowned in wine, stood unsteadily and shouted something about the Republic, about the Jedi, about how their enemies had only won because the Sith had been too merciful. The table roared with bitter laughter. The captain, emboldened by attention and drink, slurred, "We need a real monster." Tenebrae's gaze drifted to him. The captain's grin faltered. His pupils widened. He went still as a statue. Silence fell hard enough to bruise. "Show them," the captain whispered, though no one had spoken the words to him. His hand reached for the knife at his belt with slow, reverent care, as if drawing a sacred blade. Kairos started to rise. "Stop!" The captain lifted the knife to his mouth. He pressed the edge to his tongue. His face did not show pain, only awe, as if he were offering something precious. Dramath laughed again, but the sound cracked. "Enough," he said too brightly. "Sit down, you fool." Tenebrae did not blink. The knife moved. Blood spilled onto the black stone floor, dark and steaming. The captain made a choking sound, half laugh, half sob, and fell to his knees. The hall erupted in motion, servants flinching back, some Sith Lords rising, others leaning forward to watch. Nira's breath hitched in something like pleasure. "Oh," she murmured, not horrified at all. "He can take a mind like a purse." Varen's amulet burned hot against his skin. He felt the boy's touch brush him again, insistent now, curious at resistance. Varen did not let his thoughts scatter. He pictured a closed door. He pictured iron. The pressure slid away, frustrated. Karos stared at the bleeding captain with open disgust. "This is not strength," he snarled. It is control," Dramath cut in, voice sharp now, dropping all pretense. His eyes glittered. "It is what our enemies fear." Tenebrae finally looked away from the captain. The man collapsed fully, blood pooling beneath him, life leaving in quiet gurgles. Tenebrae's expression did not change. He had taken nothing visible from the dying man. No scream, no show. Only the simple demonstration that a thought could be turned into a leash. Around the table, fear bloomed. Awe bloomed. Desire bloomed. Varen watched those blooms like a botanist studying poisonous flowers. He understood then what Dramath was truly offering. Not an heir. Not a symbol. A weapon that would not stop at enemies. Varen chose his moment when the hall was loudest, when Dramath's laughter had returned and wine had resumed its steady flow. He slipped from the feast with Karos in his wake, guiding the larger man down a corridor that smelled of wet stone and oldu incense. They entered a smaller chamber where candles guttered in sconces, and an ancient map lay spread across a table. The map was not of Medriaas alone, but of routes, old hyperspace lanes, half-remembered passages marked by Sith hands long dead. Karos slammed the door shut with more force than necessary. "That boy's an abomination," he hissed. Varen did not disagree. He only set his palm on the table and let the amulet rest there, as if proving to himself it was real. "He is dangerous," Varen said carefully. "More dangerous than Dramath understands." Karos barked a humorless laugh. "Dramath understands exactly what he wants." "Yes." Varen's fingers brushed the amulet's surface. It had been taken from a tomb on Korriban, pried from the skeletal throat of a sorcerer who had died trying to bind his own spirit. "The boy tried to enter my mind the moment we arrived. And he failed." Karos' eyes widened, the first flicker of hope cutting through his fury. "How?" Varen lifted the amulet. Candlelight gleamed across its bronze runes. "Old protections," he said. "Crude in a way, but effective. Someone once feared a mind like his." Nira's voice drifted from the shadows. "Or someone once was a mind like his." Karos turned, startled to find her there. "Spying?" "Listening," Nira corrected, stepping into the candlelight. Her smile was sharp. "We are too few for secrets." Varen watched her with caution. "You enjoyed his little display." Nira's eyes shone. "I enjoyed seeing the fear in this hall," she admitted. "Fear makes people honest. And that boy." She tilted her head. "That boy could make whole worlds honest." Karos' fist struck the table. "And he would make us honest too, whether we wish it or not." Varen nodded once. "We cannot crown a chain and pretend it is a crown. Dramath thinks he can guide the boy. He cannot. No one can." Nira's smile faded only slightly. "So what do you propose, Varen?" Varen held her gaze. "We kill him." The candle flames wavered, as though the chamber itself inhaled. Karos exhaled slowly. "Dramath will tear us apart." "Perhaps," Varen said. "But if we do nothing, the boy will do worse. He will not stop with captains and servants. He will take lords. He will take worlds. And when he is done, there will be no empire left to rule. Only him." Nira's fingers tightened on her dagger hilt. Her eyes did not leave Varen's. "And if we kill him," she said softly, What do we rule then? Varen's answer was quiet and absolute. We rule ourselves. Dramath's private chamber was warmer than the hall, lit by a brazier that glowed like banked coals. Black silk hangings stirred with each draught, making the shadows shift like living things. He tore his gauntlets off and threw them onto a table, the metal clanging. They looked at him, Dramath said, voice tight. They looked at him and saw what I see. Asha knelt near the brazier, prayer chain looped around her fingers. Her veil hid most of her face, but it could not hide the tremor in her shoulders. They looked, she whispered, and some of them saw themselves dying. Dramath spun toward her. You always speak in omens. I speak in truth. Asha's voice rose, thin with strain. He is not like other children. He does not dream. He does not laugh unless he is imitating it. When he looks at me, her fingers tightened around the bone beads until they creaked. When he looks at me, it feels like being measured for a coffin. Dramath's expression flashed with annoyance, and beneath it, fear. He is power, he said, as if the word could answer everything. We have lost worlds, Asha. We have lost Korriban's certainty, our fleets, our banners. The Republic celebrates while we bleed in shadows. Power is what we need. And what will power demand? She asked. Her tears darkened the veil. Everything, Dramath. Always everything. He opened his mouth to reply, and stopped. Tenebrae stood in the doorway. The torchlight behind him cast a halo around his pale face, turning him into a child-shaped icon carved from bone. His eyes moved from Dramath to Asha, and back again with the slow calm of someone reading a text he already knew by heart. You speak as though I am not here, Tenebrae said. Asha's breath caught. Dramath stepped forward, the Lord's instinct to protect and possess battling in the same motion. You are my son, Dramath said quickly. You will be what I make you. Tenebrae tilted his head. Will I? The question was small. It landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Asha rose unsteadily. My lord, she tried, meaning Tenebrae and hating herself for it. You are tired. Come, eat, sleep. Tenebrae's gaze slid to her prayer chain. Your beads are worn, he observed. You have prayed for me to die. Asha went white beneath the veil. Dramath's eyes widened, fury flaring. Enough, he snarled. Tenebrae's expression did not change. You fear what you cannot hold, he said simply. All of you do. He stepped into the room. The silk hangings stilled as if the air itself held its breath. Dramath felt suddenly like a man standing too close to an open pit. Later, when the feast had blurred into loudness and false camaraderie, Nira found Tenebrae where he stood apart from the others, watching from a corridor that overlooked the hall. Below them, exiled lords drank and boasted, telling themselves they were still masters of fate. Nira approached with her soft predator's grace. You do not enjoy their games? She asked. Tenebrae did not turn his head. They are not my games, he said. Nira laughed quietly and stepped closer, letting her perfume cut through the smell of smoke and wet stone. Not yet, she agreed. But they could be. She brushed his shoulder as if to test whether he was flesh, whether he would flinch at touch. His robe was cool under her fingers. He did not flinch. You are wasted here, Nira murmured. Medriaas is a stone in a cold sea. Beyond these walls, there are worlds that have never heard the Sith name and would tremble at it. Tenebrae finally looked at her. His gaze was disconcertingly steady. You want to sit near a throne, he said. Nira's smile sharpened. I want the Empire to live, she corrected smoothly. And I want to be remembered for helping it. Tenebrae's eyes narrowed a fraction, like a blade aligning. You want to be safe. Nira felt the words in her chest like fingers pressing against bruises. She kept her smile in place, but it took effort now. Safety is a foolish dream, she said lightly. We are Sith. Tenebrae's voice dropped, intimate. You are afraid of Varen. Nira's throat tightened. She had not spoken that fear aloud. She had barely admitted it to herself. He is cautious, she said, forcing calm. Caution is useful. Caution is a cage, Tenebrae replied. His shadow on the wall behind him stretched too long, tapering into something that did not match a child's shape. He will try to stop me. Nira swallowed. And will he? Tenebrae's gaze drifted past her, toward the hall below. He will try, he said, and he will fail, unless you help him. Nira's smile faltered just a crack. Why would I help him? Tenebrae looked back at her. Because you are clever, he said, as if that were praise. And clever people think they can choose the storm's direction. Nira felt, for the first time in years, the old edge of real fear. Not fear of death, but fear of helplessness. What are you? She whispered before she could stop herself. Tenebrae considered her. Hungry, he said. The corridor's torches hissed as if startled. Nira stepped back a fraction, careful not to show it. Tenebrae watched her retreat with the patient interest of someone deciding which bone to break first. The temple beneath the keep had been old before Dramath's bloodline claimed it. Its air tasted of dust and cold iron. The stone walls sweated with moisture that ran down carved grooves like tears. Varen knelt within a shallow circle etched into the floor. He worked with a small blade, carving fresh lines into ancient grooves, deepening symbols that had once been meant to bind spirits, and now would be used to bind a child. His hands did not shake. If fear lived in him, and it did, it was locked behind discipline. He had learned in war that panic killed faster than any blade. Kairos stood at the edge of the circle holding a torch. The flame threw harsh light across his face, emphasizing the tension in his jaw. If this fails, Kairos said, voice low, we die. Varen did not look up. Yes. Nira leaned against a pillar, arms folded. She watched Varen's careful work with an expression that could have been amusement or admiration. You do not hesitate, she observed. Varen's blade scraped against stone. Hesitation is for people who believe someone will save them, he said. Nira's mouth curved. And you believe no one will? I believe, Varen said, that salvation is a story told to children to make them sleep. Nira's gaze flicked, briefly, toward the altar at the far end of the chamber. A metal dagger lay there, simple in design but heavy with intention. Beside it, a hilt that held a red crystal, an heirloom weapon from some dead lord who had not lived long enough to see exile. The tools of power, the tools of murder, often the same. She pushed off the pillar and walked closer, her boots echoing. Dramath thinks the boy is his, she said. He will fight. He will, Varen agreed, still carving. But Dramath is not our greatest obstacle. Kairos frowned. Then what is? Varen finally lifted his eyes. In the torchlight they looked almost black. The boy, he said simply. Kairos' grip tightened on the torch. He is young. Varen's gaze returned to the rune he was cutting, deepening it with a slow, deliberate stroke. So is a wildfire when it starts, he said. It still burns a forest. The chambers seemed to listen. The old statues that lined the walls, Sith kings and queens with mouths twisted in eternal scorn, loomed like judges waiting to see whether these exiles would betray their own blood or be devoured by it. Nira crouched near the altar, her fingers hovering above the dagger without touching it. And what of after? She asked. When the boy is dead, when Dramath is furious, when we are still stranded. Varen's voice was quiet. Then we live, he said, and we do not build an empire on a corpse that can walk. The attempt came before dawn. Varen had argued against it. Too crude, too uncertain. But one of the lesser exiles, a man eager to prove loyalty, had insisted he could slip into the keep and end the threat with a single blade. Pride was a common poison among Sith. Exile did not cure it. Tenebrae woke before the door opened. He lay in the dark and listened, Not with ears, but with the sense that had always been sharper than sight. Minds moved in the corridor like mice in walls, small panicked flickers. One mind burned hotter than the rest, intent, focused, trembling at the edge of violence. The door creaked. A hooded figure slid into the chamber, knife raised. The assassin's breath was shallow, careful. He approached the bed like a hunter approaching prey. Tenebrae sat up. The assassin froze for a fraction of a heartbeat, surprised by the boy's wakefulness. It was enough. Tenebrae's gaze met the assassin's eyes, and the man's intent faltered. Confusion spread through his mind like ink in water. His thoughts, kill, 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 stuttered and broke. Behind the assassin, the guard at Tenebrae's door stepped forward. The guard's eyes were glassy, empty. He moved with smooth obedience. The knife in his hand was already wet with someone else's blood from some earlier duty, blood that made it eager. The assassin turned too late. The guard's blade slid across the assassin's throat with a simple, efficient motion. The sound was soft, like cloth tearing. Blood sprayed, dark against the stone. The assassin staggered back, hands fluttering uselessly at the wound, and collapsed against the doorframe. Tenebrae watched him die with calm curiosity, head tilted slightly as though studying an insect's final twitch. The guard stood waiting, knife dripping. Tenebrae rose from the bed and walked barefoot across the moonlit floor. He stopped near the corpse and looked down. The assassin's mind was still there, flickering and frantic, trying to cling to life. Tenebrae brushed it lightly, not even bothering to take control, just tasting. Fear. Regret. A last desperate prayer to a god that would not answer. Tenebrae's lips pressed together. "You should have been braver," he whispered, not unkindly. The assassin's eyes went dull. The body slackened. Tenebrae turned away and looked toward the window. Beyond it, the rain had eased into mist. The keep's torches burned low, unaware. He could feel Varen's mind elsewhere in the fortress, hard and shielded, like stone wrapped in iron. Tenebrae's attention touched that shield and slid away, irritated. Varen was not like the others. Varen did not come when pulled. Tenebrae's curiosity sharpened into something colder. He walked to the door and stepped over the corpse without looking down again. "Clean," he told the guard. The guard nodded once, obedient as a tool. Tenebrae left his chamber and moved into the sleeping keep, silent as a thought. They invited him as if offering a crown. Dramath called it an ascension, an old rite, half ceremony, half political theater. The exiles would gather in the underground temple to recognize the strength within his bloodline. Dramath's voice had carried confidence when he announced it. His eyes had carried something else. Tenebrae followed without hesitation. The temple chamber greeted them with cold stone and the smell of burned wax. Runes carved into the floor formed a circle that looked, at a glance, like any other ritual marking. Tenebrae stepped into the center as if it belonged to him. His robe did not stir. His hair lay flat against his head despite the draft that made candle flames tremble. Dramath stood at the circle's edge, red blade half ignited in his grip, the weapon humming softly like a warning. "This is for you," Dramath said too loudly. Tenebrae looked up at him. "Is it?" he asked. Varen stood opposite Dramath, hands lifted, palms open. He looked like a man in prayer. Nira and Kairos flanked him, forming a triangle around the circle. Their attention was focused inward toward the runes, toward the boy. Tenebrae's gaze moved from Varen to Nira to Kairos. "You all came," he said, voice almost pleased. "How considerate." Nira smiled, but her eyes were tight. "We would honor you," she said smoothly. Tenebrae's eyes lingered on her. "You would use me," he corrected. Then his gaze snapped back to Varen. "You would stop me." Varen's face did not change. "We would ensure the survival of our people," he said. Tenebrae's expression softened into something like pity. "You mean yourselves?" The candles guttered. A pressure filled the chamber. Not wind, not heat, but the sensation of an unseen hand pressing against the mind. Several of Dramath's guards outside the circle stiffened, eyes unfocusing. Dramath's jaw clenched. He felt it too, his son's power spreading like oil across water, searching for seams. Varen's amulet warmed against his throat. The runes in the floor pulsed faintly, reacting to the boy's presence like old wounds reopening. Dramath stepped forward, tension making his armor creak. "Tenebrae," he said, voice strained. "Do not." Tenebrae's gaze flicked to him. Dramath's breath caught. For an instant, Dramath felt his own thoughts slide. Not taken, not controlled, but nudged. A suggestion. A soft command. "Kneel." Dramath's knees bent a fraction before he caught himself. Rage flared in his chest, bright and violent. Tenebrae watched that rage with interest. "You feel it," he murmured. "You feel how easy it would be." Varen's voice cut through. "Begin," he commanded. Kairos and Nira tightened their focus. The runes in the floor flared, lines of faint red light crawling up from stone as if the temple were bleeding. Tenebrae's eyes widened slightly, the first true change in his expression. Not fear. Surprise. The circle was not a crown. It was a cage. Tenebrae tested the circle as one tests a door. He pushed, not with muscle, but with will. The air inside the runes thickened. Candle flames bent outward as if driven by a sudden gust. The carved symbols in the floor responded with a low hum that vibrated through bone. Varen held his hands steady, fingers splayed. Sweat beaded at his temples. "Hold," he said through clenched teeth. Kairos' face twisted in effort. The larger man's shoulders trembled as though bearing a physical weight. Nira's lips parted in a silent gasp. Her eyes gleamed with strain, her earlier confidence stripped away. Tenebrae's calm cracked. His brows drew together. A flush rose in his cheeks, an almost human sign of emotion. Then his mouth opened, and the sound that came out was not a child's shout but something deeper, layered, a resonance that made the temple's stones seem to shiver. The pressure against the circle intensified. The runes flared brighter, lines of red light crawling up from the floor like veins. Varen's amulet burned against his skin. He could feel the boy's mind now, not merely pressing, but reaching, trying to hook into their thoughts, trying to turn their focus against each other. Images erupted in Varen's mind. Fire, screaming ships, the Republic's banners raised over Sith corpses. He tasted old shame and fresh rage. Varen did not let the images take him. He anchored himself in the present, the cold stone under his knees, the heat of the amulet, the weight of his own breath. Nira's eyes widened as she fought a different intrusion, something intimate, something cruel. She saw herself kneeling, saw Tenebrae's hand in her hair, felt her will dissolving. Her throat tightened. She snarled, a sound ripped raw from pride. Kairos grunted as his knees threatened to buckle. "This is madness," he spat. Dramath shouted from the edge of the circle, red blade fully ignited now, its light cutting harsh angles across his face. "Stop!" he roared at Varen. "Release him!" Varen did not look at Dramath. He could not. If he faltered, the boy would spill out of the circle like poison. Tenebrae turned toward Dramath, eyes blazing now with something that looked, almost, like betrayal. "Father," he said, voice dripping with contempt. "You brought them here." Dramath's hand tightened on his weapon. "I brought them to kneel," he snarled. "Not to kill you." Tenebrae's lips peeled back from his teeth. "Then you are weaker than I thought." The temple's air grew colder. The candles guttered low, starving. Somewhere above, in the keep's foundations, stone groaned as if the building itself were bracing for impact. Varen felt the circle strain. The runes were holding, but barely. He could feel hairline cracks in the ritual, tiny failures opening like mouths. "No," Varen breathed. Nira's gaze snapped to the altar. The dagger waited there. The red crystal hilt waited. Kairos' hands shook. Dramath's blade hummed. Tenebrae stood in the center of the cage, eyes too bright, and gathered himself like a storm, deciding where to break. The moment came not with triumph, but with horror. Varen broke from his stance, moving faster than thought, snatching the dagger from the altar. Its metal was cold, unnaturally so, as if it had never been warmed by a living hand. He stepped toward the circle and the runes flared in response, opening a seam. Just enough. Tenebrae saw him. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered in the boy's eyes. Then Tenebrae lifted his palm. Dark energy rippled from him. Not lightning, not flame. Something heavier, like smoke made solid. It pressed against Varen's chest, against Kairos' mind, against Nira's breath. The air turned bitter cold. Candle flames blackened, curling inward as if being eaten. Kairos cried out without sound and dropped to one knee, hands clutching at his throat. His eyes bulged as if something invisible were squeezing the life from him. Nira staggered back, nails scraping stone as she caught herself on a pillar, face pale. Varen forced himself forward anyway. The smoke pressed harder, trying to stop him, trying to turn his muscles into stone. Varen's amulet flared hot enough to burn. He tasted copper and ash. Tenebrae's voice layered over itself as he spoke, child and something older. "You do not know what you kill," he said. Varen's teeth bared. "I know exactly," he rasped, and drove the dagger into Tenebrae's chest. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the temple screamed. Not with sound, but with sensation. A shockwave tore outward from the circle, hurling Nira to the floor, slamming Kairos onto his side, cracking stone beneath Varen's feet. The candles went out in a single instant, not snuffed, but consumed. Tenebrae's eyes widened, more in outrage than pain. His hands clutched at the dagger's hilt, small fingers slicking with blood. His mouth opened, and Varen felt the boy pull. Not at flesh, at life. The pressure in the room became a vacuum. Breath fled lungs. Heat fled skin. Varen felt his own vitality tugged like a thread. For an instant he saw the world through Tenebrae's hunger, everything alive reduced to a taste, a resource. Somewhere above, far away, a scream echoed through the keep as a servant collapsed. Skin paling, eyes dulling. Another scream, and another. The drain rippled outward, searching for more. Varen slammed his will against the runes, forcing the circle shut. "Seal!" he shouted. Nira, shaking, thrust her hands toward the floor, pouring every scrap of strength into the symbols. Kairos, gasping, clawed his way upright and did the same, face contorted. The runes flared, red lines burning brighter than torchlight ever had. Tenebrae's body arched. His blood steamed in the cold air. His gaze locked on Varen, furious, accusing, almost curious, as if even now he wondered why resistance existed at all. Then the light in his eyes went out. The pressure vanished. Silence crashed into the chamber, heavy as stone. Varen stood over the boy's small body, dagger still buried, and realized his hands were shaking at last. Dramath did not move. His red blade remained ignited, humming in the dark like an unanswered question. By dawn, Medriaas had learned a new kind of quiet. The rain had thinned to mist that clung to everything, making the world look as though it had been wrapped in wet cloth. Near the keep, a small village lay scattered like dropped pieces from a child's game. Houses slumped under ash, doors hanging open, mud churned by frantic feet that had gone nowhere. Bodies lay where they had fallen. A woman face down in the road, fingers dug into mud as if she had tried to pull herself forward. A child curled beside a doorway, eyes still open, expression frozen in confusion. A man slumped against a wall with a bucket overturned beside him, water seeping into the ground as though the earth could still drink. No wounds marked them, no blood, only a wrongness, the pallor of skin gone gray, the emptiness in the eyes. Dramath walked among them, carrying Tenebrae's body wrapped in black cloth. He held the small weight as if it were an insult. His arms were rigid, his steps too steady. The Lord's face was twisted into something rawer than rage, something that made his features look unfamiliar, as if grief had peeled away the man he pretended to be. Asha followed behind, hands bloody from digging at the frozen ground near the temple entrance, trying to find somewhere that felt safe enough for burial. Her veil was torn. Her prayer beads were gone. She had stopped praying sometime in the night, perhaps because she had realized no god could answer this. Dramath stopped beside a tree whose leaves had blackened overnight. He stared at it as though expecting it to apologize. "This was his," he said, voice low. Asha swallowed. "It was his doing," she corrected, but the words sounded weak against the evidence. Dramath's gaze snapped to her. Wild. "You think I do not know?" he snarled. "You think I did not feel him pulling? He could have taken the world, Asha. The whole world." "And he did not," she whispered. Dramath laughed, a sound like something breaking. "Because they killed him." He looked back toward the keep. The towers rose above the mist, ancient and indifferent. Somewhere inside, Varen and the others would be gathering their things, preparing to flee. Dramath could feel their presence like sparks in the distance. His fingers tightened on the cloth-wrapped body. "They took my son," he said, and the words were not spoken as a father. They were spoken as a ruler whose property had been stolen. Asha reached out as if to touch his arm, to pull him back from the edge of something. He shrugged her off without looking. "I will hunt them," Dramath said. "I will tear their names out of the Force itself if I must." Asha's voice shook. "And what of him?" she asked, nodding toward the bundle in Dramath's arms. "What of the fact that he would have—" "Enough," Dramath barked. "He is dead. He is mine. And they will pay. Nyanda." He began walking again, boots sinking into mud beside the lifeless bodies of his people. As he passed, the mist swirled around him like a cloak. Asha followed, silent now, eyes fixed on Tenebrae's wrapped face as though expecting it to open its eyes and accuse her one last time. The first clash came in the keep's throat. Varen and his allies had not intended to linger. They had meant to leave before Dramath could gather enough loyalists to make pursuit immediate. But Dramath moved faster than grief should allow, as if rage had turned him into a blade. Varen was halfway down a corridor with Kairos and Nira when the air filled with the snap hiss of an igniting weapon. Red light spilled across stone like fresh blood. Dramath stood at the far end of the hallway, his blade held low, his posture that of a man who had already decided to kill. Guards clustered behind him, hesitant, eyes flicking between their lord and the exiles they had once called allies. "You murdered my son," Dramath said, voice calm in a way that was more frightening than shouting. Varen did not lift his weapon yet. "We prevented a catastrophe," he replied, and even as he spoke he knew the words were useless. Grief did not negotiate. Dramath's lips curled. "Catastrophe," he echoed, tasting the word. "He was power. He was hunger," Varen corrected. Dramath moved. He crossed the distance between them with a speed that made the guards gasp. His blade slashed toward Varen's head. Varen ignited his own weapon just in time, red meeting red with a scream of energy. The corridor filled with heat and light. Sparks scattered, burning tiny holes into the stone. Dramath fought like a man trying to carve his way out of pain. Each strike was heavy, brutal, meant to break bone, meant to punish. Varen fought differently, precise, economical, the way a soldier fights when he knows he cannot afford to waste motion. Even so, Dramath's fury drove him back step by step. Kairos lunged forward, hands outstretched. "Stop!" he shouted, trying to wedge himself between the blades. "Enough! We are tearing ourselves apart!" Dramath's elbow slammed into Kairos' face, sending him sprawling. Blood streamed down Kairos' brow. He blinked, stunned as though he had been struck by betrayal more than fist. Nira pressed herself against the wall, watching the duel with eyes like polished stone. She did not move to help. Her mind was already measuring outcomes, weighing which side would be strongest afterward. Varen parried another heavy blow. The impact jarred his arms to the shoulder. Dramath leaned in close, face lit in red. "You feared him," Dramath hissed. You feared a child. Varen's jaw clenched. I feared what he would become, he said, and pushed Dramath back with a sharp shove of the Force. Dramath stumbled one step, recovered instantly, and came in again. Faster now, blade aimed not for Varen's weapon but for his throat. Varen twisted. The red blade skimmed past his neck, close enough to singe hair. He countered, aiming at Dramath's wrist, but Dramath rolled his hand, turning the strike aside. Their weapons locked, crackling. For a heartbeat they stood blade to blade, faces inches apart, both breathing hard. Nira's voice cut through, quiet and venomous. "Dramath," she said. "Your guards are watching you bleed." Dramath's eyes flicked toward the hesitant men behind him, and in that flicker Varen saw the crack. Not in Dramath's skill, but in his control. Dramath cared how he appeared. Dramath cared about power even now. Varen took the opening. He shoved hard with the Force, not at Dramath but at the torch sconce beside him. The torch tore free, smashing into the stone. Fire burst across the corridor floor, a sudden wall of flame. Dramath recoiled instinctively. Varen stepped back, blade raised, retreating with Karos and Nira into the smoke. Dramath's shout followed them ragged. "Run!" he screamed. "Run into the dark. I will find you." Varen did not look back, but he felt the promise like a hook in his spine. Nira moved like water finding a crack. While Varen shouted orders and Karos tried to steady himself against dizziness and blood loss, Nira slipped back into the temple antechamber under the pretense of retrieving supplies. The corridor was empty now, the keep's servants too frightened to linger near the place where a child had died and a village had gone cold. A single candle burned in the antechamber, stubbornly refusing to die. Its light trembled over stone, and over the altar where the tools of the night's violence still lay. Nira's eyes went immediately to Varen's bronze amulet. He had removed it during the duel, perhaps to keep it from heating further against his skin, perhaps because he had not expected to need it again so soon. It rested on the altar like an offering. Nira hesitated for only a moment, long enough to imagine Varen's expression if he realized it was gone, long enough to taste the risk. Then she slid it into her pocket with a quick, practiced motion. The metal was warm, as if it held a heartbeat. She exhaled, satisfied. Protection was a valuable thing in exile. So was leverage. When she returned to the surface, the mist had thickened again. Ship's engines growled in the landing yard, eager to leave. Exiles hurried with crates, faces tense, glancing up at the keep's balconies as if expecting Dramath's blade to fall from the sky. Varen stood at the shuttle ramp, voice sharp. "Move," he snapped. "Now. We do not stay for his wrath to sharpen." Karos leaned against a pillar near the ramp, breathing hard, blood dripping down his nose. He wiped at it with the back of his hand and looked at Varen with exhausted bitterness. "We did what we had to," he muttered, as if saying it could make the night less ugly. Varen did not answer. He was listening, not with ears, but with the awareness that had kept him alive. Dramath's presence burned above them like a beacon of rage. Sure enough, a dark figure appeared on a balcony high above the landing yard. Dramath stood with his red blade unignited, armor soaked by mist, posture rigid. He looked less like a man, and more like a statue carved for vengeance. His gaze locked on the departing exiles. Nira felt the weight of that gaze even from below. She held her face neutral, giving Dramath no satisfaction. Inside her pocket, Varen's amulet warmed against her fingers like a secret. Dramath's voice carried over the yard, amplified by fury. "You will not hide," he called. "Not in the unknown regions, not in the dark between stars. I will drag you back by your shadows." Some of the exiles faltered, fear slipping into their eyes. Varen did not falter. He stepped onto the ramp, turned, and met Dramath's gaze with cold defiance. "Try," Varen said, not loud enough for the balcony, but loud enough for the men around him to hear. Then he disappeared into the shuttle. The ramp hissed shut. Engines flared. The ship rose into the mist, leaving the keep behind like a curse. The ship's bridge smelled of overheated circuitry and damp cloaks. A red hologram star map floated above the navigation console, its lines flickering with instability. Most routes were broken, uncertain, incomplete. Paths that led away from known space and into regions the Republic's charts did not dare name. Varen stood with both hands braced on the console, staring at the map as if it were a wound he needed to cauterize. The ship shuddered as it punched into hyperspace, stars smearing into pale lines beyond the viewports. Behind him, voices rose. "We should have taken Dramath's keep," one exile snarled. "We should have killed him too." "And do what with his dead castle?" another snapped back. "Rule Ash?" Caro sat in a chair near the rear of the bridge, head bandaged, eyes narrowed. Blood had crusted at the corner of his mouth. He looked like a man who had fought for something and wasn't sure anymore what it had been. Nira stood near the map, her smile controlled, her posture relaxed. She looked as though the night had been merely an inconvenient storm. Her hand remained in her pocket, fingers curled around the bronze amulet she had taken. The metal pulsed with warmth in time with her heartbeat. Varen let the arguing continue for a moment, allowing it to burn itself out. Then he turned. "Enough," he said, voice flat. The exiles quieted, not because they respected him, but because they feared the alternatives. Varen could see it in their faces, ambition sharpening into desperation. "We are not an empire," one lord muttered. Varen's gaze fixed on him. "No," he agreed. "We are not anymore." The admission hit the room like a slap. Several men flinched. Nira's smile tightened slightly, as though she disliked hearing truth spoken aloud. Varen continued, voice steady. "We have lost fleets and worlds. We have lost our public name. The Republic believes we are a story that ended, that ignorance is our only advantage." Karos shifted. "And what now?" he asked, voice hoarse. "We drift forever? Hide forever?" Varen looked back to the red star map. The unknown region sprawled before them like a sea full of unseen teeth. "We find a place to breathe," he said. "We find resources. We rebuild, not as Dramath wanted, not under a child with a hollow hunger. We rebuild slowly, quietly." "None. And without a throne?" Nira asked, her voice silk wrapped around steel. Varen's eyes flicked to her. He felt, suddenly, the absence at his throat, the missing weight of his amulet. His stomach tightened. He did not react outwardly. He would not give her satisfaction. "Without a single throne," Varen corrected. "If we make one man absolute, we invite another Tenebrae. We invite another catastrophe." A murmur ran through the bridge, uncertain. Some faces twisted with resentment. Lords did not like being told they would not kneel, because it also meant they would not be kneeled to. Karos leaned forward, wincing. "We are Sith," he said. "We kneel to strength." Varen's voice hardened. "Then we must learn a different kind of strength," he replied. "One that does not devour us from within." Silence followed. It was not agreement. It was simply the quiet that comes when people realize there is no better plan. Nira watched Varen with bright, calculating eyes. In her pocket, the amulet warmed as if listening. Outside the viewports, hyperspace rushed on, endless, indifferent. And far behind them, on Medriaas, Dramath's rage burned like a signal no darkness could fully hide. The tremor reached Coruscant as a whisper. It slid beneath the bright noise of the capital, beneath speeder traffic and Senate debates, and the endless hum of a republic that believed, with stubborn relief, that the worst was over. It found its way into the Jedi temple like a cold draft slipping under a door. Saris sat cross-legged on a polished stone floor, hands resting on his knees, breath measured. Around him, the meditation hall held stillness like a sacred object. A few other Jedi meditated nearby, their presences steady in the Force like quiet stars. Then the candles along the walls flickered. Saris's eyes snapped open. A ripple passed through the bowl of water set before the hall's central statue, the surface shivering though no hand touched it. Saris drew in a sharp breath as something pierced the calm, an image that did not belong. Red light. Stone carved with screaming faces. A child's pale eyes widening. A dagger plunging down. A sudden absence, like a heart stopping. Saris pressed a hand to his chest as if he could physically block the sensation. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only a sour aftertaste in the Force. Dark, hungry, and then abruptly gone. Across the hall, another Jedi stirred, frowning. "Did you feel that?" Saris stood slowly, keeping his face composed despite the thudding in his pulse. "Yes," he said. He left the hall and walked quickly through the temple's corridors, past statues of ancient masters, past students who looked up in curiosity. The temple was bright, clean, orderly, everything the Sith were not. And yet, for a moment, Saris had felt something from the dark so sharp it had nearly cut him. He found Master Relin in a small council chamber, speaking quietly with two other Jedi. The Master's expression sharpened when Saris entered unannounced. "Knight," Relin said, mild reproach. "This is not—" There was a disturbance, Saris cut in, then forced himself to breathe and temper his tone. A sharp one, a death. Master Relin's brows knit. "The Sith are gone," he said, as if reciting doctrine. "We have hunted their remnants. The war is ended." Saris hesitated. The vision's red light still burned behind his eyes. "This did not feel like a remnant," he said quietly. One of the other masters gave a soft, dismissive exhale. "The dark side echoes," she said. "Trauma has a long shadow." Saris clenched his jaw. "This was not an echo," he insisted. "It was immediate. It was hungry." Master Relin's gaze held Saris for a long moment, weighing his conviction against the temple's long-held relief. Finally, Relin said, "We will meditate on it. Do not spread alarm." Saris bowed stiffly, frustration burning beneath obedience. As he turned to leave, he felt the Force settle again. Calm, bright, reassuring. And yet he could not forget the momentary emptiness that followed the child's death. Not relief. Not peace. A void. Supreme Chancellor Talmora Grent listened to bad news the way she listened to good, with the same calm face and the same careful control. The Senate chamber on Coruscant was an amphitheater of voices and ambition, tiers of senators watching from balconies like hawks perched on cliffs. The Republic had survived the Great Hyperspace War, and survival had become a kind of pride. Reconstruction, expansion, commerce, these were the new hymns. An advisor leaned close to Talmora, whispering about border raiders. Another spoke of supply shortages on a mid-rim world. A third offered a report on shipyard output, numbers and projections meant to sound optimistic. Then the Jedi emissary spoke, quiet enough that only those close could hear. "A disturbance in the Force," the Jedi said. "Sharp. Unusual." Talmora's gaze flicked to the emissary with polite attention, as though discussing weather. "Unusual how?" The Jedi hesitated. "It suggests activity," he said carefully. "Dark activity." Talmora's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of her podium. "The Sith are finished," she said. "The statement as firm as law." It was a truth the Republic needed. A truth it had built its recovery on. "We believe so," the emissary admitted. A murmur ran through the nearby advisors. Fear was a currency in the Senate. It could buy votes and justify budgets. Talmora knew that. She also knew fear could fracture fragile unity. "We cannot govern on phantoms," she said smoothly. Her eyes swept the chamber, taking in senators already leaning forward to catch whispers. "We have pirates and warlords to manage. We have worlds to rebuild. Do not bring old nightmares into a room that must build tomorrow." The emissary bowed, restrained. "The Jedi will investigate quietly," he said. "Yes," Talmora agreed, relief hidden behind authority. "Quietly." As the emissary stepped back, an advisor leaned in again, voice low. Chancellor, if there's even a rumor of Sith survival, then we will not call it that, Talmora said, her tone still calm. We will call it insurgency. We will call it criminal cults. We will call it anything but Sith, until we have proof. The advisor swallowed. And if the proof comes? Talmora's gaze shifted to the vast chamber, to the Republic's glittering optimism, to the senators who wanted stability more than truth. Then we will handle it, she said, and there was steel beneath the words. But we will not panic. Not now. The session resumed, voices rising, politics grinding forward. Somewhere beyond Coruscant's bright sky, in a place the Senate did not name, exiles fled through darkness. And a war that the Republic believed ended had left embers that did not know how to die. They buried him without ceremony. Dramath refused rites, refused prayers, refused anything that would suggest the boy belonged to gods or traditions rather than to him. He carried Tenebrae's body into a small burial niche carved into black stone and ordered the opening sealed. Then he left. Asha returned after, alone. She came with candles and incense because her hands needed something to do besides tremble. She removed her veil in the burial chamber, letting the cold air touch her skin. Her face, without the veil's protection, looked older, cheeks hollow, eyes shadowed, mouth drawn tight against sobs that had no place to go. The black cloth-wrapped form lay within the niche, too small, too still. It was a shape that should have been mourned with softness, with stories, with a mother's touch. Asha's hands hovered above it, then drew back. She did not know if touching him would bring comfort or something else. The torchlight was warm in the chamber, but frost rimed the stone near the niche, thin white lace that should not have formed. It made Asha's breath catch. She lit the candles anyway. The flames steadied, then wavered as if uncertain whether they were welcome. I prayed for you to die, Asha whispered. The words tasted like ash, and I hated myself for it. And now you are dead. Her voice broke. She pressed her forehead to the cold stone. I do not feel relief. I do not feel peace. The air seemed to thicken. Asha lifted her head slowly. For a moment she thought she saw movement in the shadows behind her. Not a person, not a ghost, but a shifting density, as if darkness itself were leaning closer. Her skin prickled. She forced herself to breathe. He is gone, she told the chamber, as much command as prayer. He is destroyed. Whatever was in him, whatever hunger, cannot return. Not from this. The shadows did not answer. They simply remained, pooled, listening. Asha reached for her prayer chain out of habit, and remembered it was gone. She had lost it in the dirt outside, digging with frantic hands, trying to give Tenebrae a resting place that would not devour the living around it. Her fingers curled into fists. I will not be afraid, she said, voice shaking. Not of a child's corpse. Not of what you were. Nay. The frost on the stone did not melt. Asha placed her palm against the cloth-wrapped form. It was cold. Not the cold of death alone. Something deeper, like the temperature of empty space. Asha snatched her hand back, heart hammering. She stared at the bundle, eyes wide. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. And yet Asha could not shake the feeling that she had just touched the edge of a wound that did not understand it had been closed. Hyperspace swallowed Varen's fleet the way the sea swallows stones, without pause, without care. On the bridge, Varen stood rigid as the star lines streamed past. The arguing behind him had dulled into muttering, then into sullen silence. Exhaustion settled over the ship like a blanket soaked in cold water. Even ambition tired when it could not see land. Varen's throat felt bare without the amulet. He did not search for it openly. Not yet. He catalogued the absence and filed it away with all the other dangers he could not address immediately. The map flickered. Unknown regions. Blank spaces. Old Sith legends of worlds hidden by storms and gravity wells. Places where the Republic's gaze did not reach. Varen's mind, disciplined as it was, kept returning to the moment Tenebrae's eyes went dark. Not because of pity, because of the sensation afterward, the sudden void, the brief taste of something that had almost been vast. He told himself again, as he had told Kairos, that the boy was destroyed. That hunger had been severed. Still, the memory clung. On Coruscant, Saris jolted awake in the temple's quiet hall, breath sharp. Sweat dampened his palms. The other Jedi around him remained calm, untroubled. Saris stared at the bowl of water, watching the surface ripple once more. Tiny, subtle, like a heartbeat echoing long after the heart has stopped. He pressed his hand to the floor and reached outward with the force, searching for the disturbance that had cut him. He found only brightness, only the Republic's confident pulse. It should have reassured him. Instead, it felt like standing beneath a clear sky while knowing lightning had struck somewhere beyond the horizon. On Medriaas, Dramath stood alone on a high balcony. Rain lashed his cloak, plastering it to his armor. The keep's torches flickered in the storm like watchful eyes, refusing to be extinguished. Below, the landing yard was empty. The ships were gone. The Exiles had fled into dark that Dramath could not see from here. Dramath's hands gripped the stone railing until his knuckles whitened. He stared into the mist as if he could force it to part through sheer will. His grief had hardened into a singular purpose, sharper than any blade. "They think they can run," he whispered, voice lost in rain. The storm did not answer. Dramath's jaw clenched. In his mind, he replayed the moment he felt Tenebrae's pull, the raw hunger that had nearly drained the world. Part of him, hidden and ugly, still marveled at it. Part of him still wanted it back. He let that wanting become fuel. "I will find you," he swore into the rain as if swearing to the stars themselves. "I will tear down whatever you build in the dark. I will make you beg for exile to end." Far away, hyperspace roared on, carrying Varen toward blank spaces where new wars could be born without anyone noticing. And in the bright heart of the Republic, Saris stood in the temple and felt, beneath calm, beneath doctrine, a faint, stubborn certainty that the dark had not finished speaking.